Welcome, everyone, to the Employer Content Show, part of the Talent Insight series, brought to you by HireWell and Before You Apply. I'm your host, James Hornick. Joining me is my co-host from Before You Apply. I hate it when you call me Nathan, Nate Guggia. Anyway.
What's that song? Call Me Al?
Is that the song? You can call me Al. You're going, we're showing our age now at this point.
Yeah.
Half our audience has no idea what you're talking about.
Right.
Today's segment, What Candidates Want to Know, Sales Edition. So there's a lot we're going to cover here. And to give everyone kind of a preface, we want to make this a bit of an ongoing series where we focus on a few different skill sets. And we did some survey work ahead of time for this. We also had some kind of one-to-one conversations with people to kind of better understand our thesis here. And I'm not going to say it's a theory because I believe this is fact. If you can take what job seekers really want to know, the things that typically aren't covered till mid to later in the interview process, and put that at the top of the funnel, create content around that, make that publicly available, you will have a far easier time attracting talent and the right talent than if you do what most companies do, which is not really tell anybody anything. I think that when you go to somebody's career site, you typically learn nothing. When you go to people's websites, I have no idea what most companies do just by looking at their websites. Like companies are bad at articulating what they do, and they're even worse at articulating from a hiring perspective what they have to offer and what they're about. So what we wanted to do was we didn't want to make any assumptions, because I think the content world is full of people who claim to have all the answers to everything without actually knowing anything. We put a survey up. And it was open-ended survey, though. It wasn't like a multiple choice to gather that type of like quantifiable data. We wanted to know, just ask. There were 3 questions. One was roughly. I should have these in front of me. Before you talk to a recruiter, what do you want to know to engage them? What typical things do you ask during the interview process? What do you want to know before you accepting an offer? I think were the kind of 3 ways we phased it, kind of different aspects of the process. So to be clear, we're going to cover a lot of stuff that job seekers want to know before they accept jobs. And we're not talking about what companies should address during the interview process. We're not talking about what candidates should be asking. We're talking about everything we're saying here is what we believe companies should proactively tell people through content before people become candidates, before they even apply. So that could be in your job posting, on your career site, that could be in podcast or videos, that could be in anywhere, really. So I'll keep going.
Yeah. Well, hold on real quick. This is like, I'm thinking about your post today, actually, and how it's like the high level of your post today, I think, was just the fact that like processes are really slow to evolve. Mm-hmm. And that there's, there was a time when maybe hiding information behind interviews or behind like certain gates made sense. Maybe maybe it was like a certain economic climate or in your industry or whatever. There were certain factors that probably like that made sense at a time. And like we have now like overcome that. And we're in a place where like transparency and like information, especially for hard to hire candidates, is just what enables the process. Yeah. And so I think this is one of those moments where it's like, it's time for this like antiquated model and process to evolve. And we live in a time where like creating stuff to enable that is so readily available. Yeah. It's not difficult. It's just kind of getting over this block of like things need to be done a certain way or they've always been done a certain way.
Yeah. And we're talking again about, messaging from the recruiter, that's what counts. These are things you should be putting in that. These are things you should be putting on your career site. These are things you should put on your before you apply profile. I also, and to talk, so the people who submitted surveys, it was a lot of SaaS and professional services salespeople mostly. Yeah. A little bit of pharma, a little bit of logistics. Mostly senior level and individual contributors. There were a few management executive types. I don't think we had anybody junior respond to it. People who were looking between 2020 and now. So, which I thought was interesting too. I think there's only 1 or 2 people who were looking previously, like 2019 or prior, meaning these are all people who have made job changes, in the last year or two. what else would we qualify? Mix of inside sales, outside sales, AM. So kind of well-rounded in types of like sales roles people are in. Yeah. So let's kick this off. So I've got like my initial talking points, then the stuff I found really interesting because I want to make sure we kind of cover it all. Okay. Initial stuff. None of this is surprising that salespeople want to know about comp. Okay, great. Knew that was coming. Mm-hmm. The only thing that was potentially interesting was when people wanted to know about it very upfront versus in the interview phase, which is kind of 50-50. But like salespeople expect to have a really good idea of kind of what comp is. The second thing, and this is kind of on us because I think the way the first question was phrased was like, before you have a conversation with a recruiter, pet peeve of mine. Everyone always, when you say recruiter, everyone assumes agency recruiters. And that's where I work in an agency, obviously. Yeah. But I say this in a loving, joking way, especially to anybody who actually listens to watch the show. Big secret, I don't care about helping other agency recruiters out. I really don't. When I talk about recruiters, I'm always talking 100% of the time about internal recruiters. So, because I want to help companies get better at hiring. So that's who I'm always kind of phrasing these things towards. So there were a few people who like talked about like, I want to talk with an agency that's focused in sales, or I want them to tell me the name of the company. I'm like, well, that's all implied because I'm talking about internal recruiters here. Mm-hmm. So yes. Anyways, if other agencies get better at what they're doing because they watch our content, great, but that's absolutely not who I'm actually trying to help here. Okay. Getting into other stuff that was not a real big surprise. Sales process. People want to know what your sales cycle is, what it looks like, how long it is, all those types of things. Territory came up a lot of times. A lot of people mentioned they want to know kind of upfront, what's the territory, what's their kind of charter and whatnot. Then it got into, there were a lot of people who wanted to know things about team hitting numbers, the team dynamics, are people hitting their quotas? What's the average? People are doing that. What's the growth plan? These are all important things to be able to talk about for an organization, having this up front. How do you differentiate yourself, stand out versus competitors? Again, all stuff, none of it was very surprising. A lot of companies still aren't doing it, but it was all stuff that I kind of anticipated. Mm-hmm. I think you and I now had some more interesting takeaways. And so not to say none of this stuff was interesting, but this is all stuff that you should already be doing and talking about. And I don't think I need to explain it any further why. Mm-hmm. So I'll go first on one. Technology that's being used. I think you talked to somebody. I did. I talked to somebody also, and we also had a couple of people respond in this survey. And this wasn't something that everyone said, but the people who responded were people who had made some job changes, had been around, and they know, like the one gentleman I talked to mentioned specifically, like he worked in an organization once, it was still tracking things on spreadsheets, versus actually investing in like process-based systems. And that's not a question that a lot of people would ask or necessarily dig into, but those who are concerned about what kind of stuff, like if you can address that up front, that what you guys are actually using to track your sales, it's both the signal for if you have your shit together, frankly. Totally. But also that's a big concern you can kind of put out of people's mind on the front end to get them more interested. Yeah. Like I think we've always associated tech stack with like engineering. Yeah. And now it's just important to everybody. Yeah. Well, it's like, it was part of it was like process tools. I think he was talking about CRM, the person I was talking to. But even like what your spend is on different contact sourcing, I call them sourcing tools because I'm a recruiter, but you know what I mean? In terms of like what you can do in terms of outreach, like it's a huge difference, in how productive you can be. And companies that spend money on that versus those who don't, like it matters. So, yep. Yeah, totally. That's like lead generation was something that came up in a couple conversations I was having. It's like, where do your leads come from? What are you using to source those leads? What's the percentage of inbound versus outbound? Just like all that stuff is like, those granular details really matter. They're super important to the success of the rep. And so it only makes sense that like those questions would be really top of mind. I just like, it'd be nice to get those answers at the top instead of like saving them for like 2 or 3 interviews in when you get the answer and you're like, oh, this isn't what I wanted to hear. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something that came up that that makes a lot of sense, but I wasn't expecting it was just growth.
like the opportunity to grow. And that wasn't even necessarily like financially. I think like the financial part is just implied, but it was just like, even from senior level reps who've been in the game for a really long time, everybody just like wants to grow, like grow professionally, either be able to like mentor or be mentored, upward mobility, just feel like you're advancing instead of just like coming in and like feeling stagnant, even if you're just making a lot of money. I think this idea of just growth as an individual, like ultimately ends up outweighing money. You know, like if you're in a position where it's like, yeah, sure, like the paycheck is great, but you're just feeling like you're not going anywhere, or even if like the company or the product isn't going anywhere, like there isn't like that level of like excitement still. It's it's like hard to keep going. And so that was something. Yeah.
We see that a lot with, I mean, that's a major reason why BDRs, like the lower level people, leave their job to go somewhere else, is because like, it's always because they want to get that next roll up. And maybe, you know, the way certain organizations are structured, they don't have, you're at the bottom of the pyramid. There's not as many positions on the way up. So conveying that like there is that kind of upward growth opportunity, and how many, you know, whatever people are able to kind of achieve that up front, because that positions you to better be able to retain people longer. Especially if someone's deciding between you and the next firm, you know, the one that's able to convey that they have that upward growth opportunity. I guess while we're talking about growth, because I know this is another one that's came up twice. I mentioned this last week. I know we having a conversation about this today, is like the most overused thing in all of trying to attract talent is saying we're growing, quote unquote, as something to get people excited. Because literally every damn company says that, and it's just vague and doesn't mean anything.
And you know, if you're the company putting that out there, it seems very exciting for you.
Yeah.
We're growing, we're hot. We've gotten funding, whatever that might be.
We made it, you guys.
We made it. But like that can be a big turnoff for some people, especially for people who've experienced that and have been burned. Or maybe just like it wasn't as exciting, because like, here's the thing, rapid growth also comes with like a lot of risk and a lot of uncertainty. And it's also code word for like, we don't have everything figured out.
What's driving the growth?
It's
specifically
very important.
Did you get funded? Who funded you?
Yes.
You know, what was tied to that funding? What are the expectations? You know what I mean? What numbers do you have to hit? What's the expectations on this role?
Yeah.
You know, do you guys actually know this product is sellable, or is this just a big test balloon to see like if it's, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of those things that come out. And here's the thing is they don't necessarily, none of that answers like, why is the role open? You know, like there's situations where like we're growing doesn't explain why, okay, it's a net new role. Okay. That's a partial explanation, but we're growing can mean the person who was in this role got promoted. That's a really important thing to know. Were they promoted? Can I talk to, you'll be able to talk to the person who was in this role previously. That's another important thing to know. Versus you can't talk to this person who's in this role previously because he's missed his numbers and we fired him. That's a completely different thing. You know what I mean?
Or we were a total shit show and they left.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't. Yeah, it was a train wreck here and people are leaving. We're trying to grow. So I think that it came up enough times with people that we had kind of going into this that people have figured. I mean, every salesperson out there, every single position they're looking at right now is the company's quote unquote growing. So you need to realize that that's very exciting for you. I'm glad you're growing, but that means nothing to the candidates.
Oh man. Oh, there's such, I just envisioned a blog post that is like, we're growing really fast. Here's what the hell this means. And then you just like get into like, here's what this means. And like, you just double down on like all the things that you don't have figured out, but all the cool opportunities to come in and help figure that out. It's really,
write it. Yeah. You got a content writer nowadays, don't you?
I do.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. That's a good one. But yeah, I mean, like, you know, before we jumped on, I was talking about like how content is meaningless without context. And this is one of those situations where it's like, you have to put meaning behind words. especially words that are overused and words that at maybe one time were used to mean exciting. And now there's been enough like history with those words that we can attach a lot of different meanings ourselves. And so, it's like there's like this depth and detail that is needed now, where like we can't just get away with saying like, oh, we're looking for like this many years of experience, or we're looking for somebody with like these skills. Like you need to like provide this additional layer of like, well, what does that mean? And why do you need that? Because now like we need to connect those dots. And if you can connect those dots for us, it removes all the guesswork and doesn't allow us to just like make stuff up in our own minds based off of like our past experiences. So if you can just like get it out and put it out in front of us, it goes a long ways and it saves everybody a whole lot of time.
There's still a ton more we got to cover.
Sorry.
And that's okay. I'm just like, I'm trying to figure out where to go next here. Another thing I thought was really interesting, which I was not expecting. There were 2 people that I talked to who mentioned they do their own research, meaning they talk to people at the company, people who left the company, or recruiters who work in sales that would know people at the company.
Ooh. Because
they just don't trust whatever the company line is anymore. Like they've been burned too many times. So that's a harder thing to put into content, but I don't necessarily like, I think one of those is the thing we just talked about. So is there someone who was in this role previously that you could build content around? Is this person now a senior manager, director, whatever, and they could put themselves out there. But do you have a strong relationship with like your quote unquote alumni network? You know what I mean? There are people who left there that still say good things about you, that would go on a limb and, kind of say that, hey, this is a good place to work, that type of thing. Yeah. The thing, another one, the last part of that is the one person I talked to mentioned that he talked to recruiters to see how many people they were able to pull out of that organization as a litmus test. Now, I don't really know how to turn that into content per se, but it's a great question to ask for your candidate. But it's totally true though too. Like we've talked about becoming a destination firm a million times. Like you become one of those places people don't leave. Like you're having an easier time hiring. But I do think there's something to be said about people who were in the role previously, whether in your company or at the company before. And if you can get buy-in from them in terms of your content efforts or whatnot, or get a review from them, or make that something, that'd be a good use case for it too. A G2 review, a Glassdoor review, or something like that from someone in the role, just so you can make sure this is a actual testimonial from someone who, has been here.
Yeah. Go ahead. I know you have more. I don't want to.
No, you can have a bunch here too. Another thing that came down to, and I kind of skipped over this. We talked before about at the very beginning. I wasn't surprised to see comp come up with salespeople, right? Mm-hmm. But the one thing that was more interesting, if people mentioned commission plan and how has it changed. So there are salespeople out there who have been burned by the changing commission plan. As soon as they hit their numbers, the numbers just keep going up, and they're never able to really make more at certain organizations because it's just kind of moving target. And if you can speak to that, because assuming one, you're not that kind of organization, right? But if you could build content around that, how just talking more granularly about how your commission plan, how people were able to kind of exceed numbers, and acknowledge that there's that kind of bad practice in the industry about kind of the moving target of comp plans. But that's phrased in a way where you're getting ahead of that, because that is an objection you're going to see come up. That's one less thing you have to worry about if you can kind of address it on the front end.
Oh, you're bringing up a really great point. Getting ahead of stuff. If you know all the things that are going to come up that, I don't know, maybe you either can't compete on, or that are these like, I don't know, make or break points, just getting ahead of it, like specifically with content, and just getting it out there. It can diffuse things really quickly. And a lot of times it diffuses things, but it creates a way for people to select themselves out. If that's going to be a deal killer for anybody,
At least you found that on the front end versus like after you spent all that time in the interview process.
Yeah. Right. Or maybe it's something even that somebody like they look at it again, back to my point about context, but they look at it, they get the context and they're like, okay, I can have a conversation about this. Like it's, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. Do you have more?
Yeah. I got two more. I know you had a bunch here still.
Go ahead.
The last one that came in just before kind of the show started, turnover and / how companies treat employees when times are tough. So I think addressing head on, like what you did in 2020, furloughs, layoffs. I know that, non-competes and lawsuits and retaliation are kind of on the darker side of this, you know what I mean? But these are concerns that salespeople have, but I think in general, talking about your policies and how you, if assuming you had a rougher time in 2020, or that could be a good kind of talking point to discuss, like, when things went down, what your policy was, how you treated employees.
Yeah.
Is another one.
Yep, for sure. You have one more, right?
Last one, yeah. And I think this was one that a lot of people said, but I thought it was interesting too. I think this is perhaps the most critical. Who's your manager? Who's actually hiring for this damn role? Can you get them to say something? Can you get them to be public with their persona? Can you get them involved in the job description? Can you mention them in the job ad? Can the recruiter tell a good story about them? Can you find this is prime content for video or podcast. Anybody who's hiring, any exec, if you can get that person to be public, even if it's just a short 2-minute video, talking about what they're hiring for, what they're about, what their philosophy is, like that, I think is easily the biggest and easiest home run out of this whole thing, because a lot of people want to know, like, what's their management philosophy? Have they ever, carried a bag before? What's their take on team dynamics? Like, these are kind of the pressing things that are ultimately the make or break at the end of it, and if you can put that stuff kind of up front on the content side, I think it's something you have to do. I'll be happy when that becomes the norm. So,
yeah, this to me, this is the biggest opportunity.
Yeah,
it's if you look at like, so I asked a couple in-house recruiters at like early mid-stage, in-house sales recruiters at early and mid-stage startups, high growth startups. But I asked them, like, where do you find candidates, or where do candidates find you? Whatever. LinkedIn. I was like, anywhere else? They're like, no, LinkedIn. It's all LinkedIn. I'm like, okay, so salespeople are on LinkedIn. Yes. Mm-hmm. Then it only makes sense to have one of your senior sales leaders, or the most senior one, like extremely active on that platform. Yeah. It's where your candidates are. I know they think that their biggest VP of sales, probably they think their biggest like objective is to drive revenue, but it's actually really to like hire and retain the best people to drive that revenue. And so they could be your biggest source of talent just by being active. Go ahead.
I'm just backing up this point. Like, LinkedIn makes their money off of 2 products, LinkedIn Recruiter and LinkedIn Sales Navigator, like bonus products geared towards recruiter and salespeople. So they're on that platform all damn day. It's
like literally a tab that is open.
Yes.
All the time.
Nonstop. And I'm saying this, I'm giving away our own company secrets here. Like, we hired 2 more this week. I had 2 more starts this week. It's been a lot easier for us to hire ever since we started getting involved in content, because literally every recruiter in the world is on LinkedIn. It's the exact same for sales. Every you have a captive audience of salespeople. They're there all day long. And if your VP of sales isn't being vocal, isn't talking about what he's hiring for, what exciting things he's doing, why people should want to work there, / just being a thought leader in terms of giving people help and how to do their job better, like, you're missing a huge friggin' opportunity.
And I tend to make more excuses for, function leaders who I would assume might be a little bit more introverted, let's say. So like, I understand that it's more difficult to convince a CTO or a head of engineering or even like a head of product or somebody to do what we're talking about. There's some that do it, but it's harder. I'm not going to make any excuses for somebody in sales. I think it's like, I would assume it's like maybe like part of kind of like who you are, to be like, want to be out there, to kind of have this like brand, to be able to like talk about the stuff that you like care about most and put your opinions out there and like build a following. And like you and I used to follow a couple in-house sales leaders until they went independent and suddenly their content just wasn't as good. But it was really good when they were in-house.
And it's also, I guess the other side of it too, is because I don't want to come down on the sides of everyone should be a sales influencer, which is not what we're saying. But it's also an opportunity to just educate people what in the hell your product actually does, or what your company actually does, you know.
Or how you think as a leader, how you manage people, like
where your industry is headed, and why people should care about your software as a service widget and what it actually means and how this can make people's lives easier and that type of thing. Because these are the things we really don't see. We see a lot of, hey, keep your head up and, you know, like make content, you know what I mean? And just stay motivated and rise and grind. But we don't actually see like, okay, how is your product going to, what's this mean to me as someone who could potentially buy, you know?
Or how you think about like go-to-market strategy and what you think like the most successful sales process is, and like all this kind of stuff. I mean, you can get so granular to like just to create a following of people who really like embrace your way of thinking. Yeah. It's just like, it's right there. Also too, you know, popular podcasts, for example. And I think like getting your VP of sales on the PR train to like see if you can get them on some like well-known podcast that salespeople follow, and like it's just like you can repurpose that content. And like I think that's like a worthwhile move to do that, to just like help get them out there. There's a big ROI in that.
Find hysterical we're talking about the pros of being a sales influencer right now.
It is kind of funny, but when you know what, when I shifted to thinking about somebody who's in-house, it changes for me. It's when I think about like the external person trying to like, I don't know. It just
I'll give you an example. So, because I think this is kind of what I mean. Chris Walker. Everyone thinks of him as the demand gen guru. Chris Walker's in sales. That's his job at his company. He's a marketing expert in demand gen, but his job is business development. How does he go about it? By becoming an expert in demand gen, and, you know, like the way he goes about what the things he talks about never comes across as salesy or crappy motivational or any of the things that all the quote unquote sales influencers do. He's spreading knowledge about what they believe the industry, where it should be headed. And it works because people are learning from him, and it gets people excited. And, you know, I just think if there's a lot of other aspects of sales, like if you can do it in demand gen marketing services, you can do it literally anywhere else. You know, you can talk about what it is that your industry sector is doing and why it's important, and it can align with what you're selling. But it can also, for the purpose of this, it can definitely help you hire. So,
I want to talk quickly about just the process for putting out information, just like as a company. So like if you're a recruiter or a head of talent and you're like, okay, like I want to start creating these assets to like get out there that give this level of information before somebody applies. Like the process, like you and I just like did the process over the course of what, a week or a week and a half or whatever. We put out a survey to get feedback from actual candidates. We had conversations with in-house recruiters to hear like what candidates care about. Like the process isn't difficult to extract this information. You can like If you're the recruiter, you know the information. And if you're a head of talent, you just go to your recruiting team and like find out like all the important things, package that up together.
Took 5 minutes to set up a survey. You and I both did 2 social posts each, and we both put our newsletters, and that was it. And then the information came to us. And then, I mean, how much did you learn this week?
How much? A lot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. A ton.
Yeah, a ton.
I learned I went in, I knew there was going to be a gap between what companies provide and what candidates want to know. I didn't realize how massive it was, right? Like massive the opportunity is for companies to, because again, we're talking about like all this stuff that people want to know in the interview process. There's no reason why you couldn't put it all on the front end through content. And there's a lot of things here, man. And I think that we learned how to do it ourselves, but also just like what these kind of things are. I think it's a worthwhile exercise, as you were saying, for anybody who's hiring anyone, just to kind of better understand what the market is. And even if you're not going to, like, we're talking about a content angle, even if you just use it for your own internal, even if you use it for your recruiter's messaging, and for things you need to proactively talk about in interview 1, you now have a list of everything that you're going to want to know, that candidates are going to want to know. So when they come across that first conversation, they're not saying, I didn't learn anything, I don't know if I'm still interested. You know, they're coming away from it saying, wow, I already know everything I want to know out of these guys. These guys were transparent.
Right. And just doing that alone, it gives your brand a vibe, like it like just sets you apart. You know, there's like, man, I think like this whole like brand play gets so complicated when it doesn't need to be. It gets so caught up in like specific types of messaging and talking about big culture stuff and all this stuff, when it's like you could just like give information that nobody else is giving and allow that to like establish who you are as a brand. Like that does more talking than this big investment in a career site. Like I get like people need to like land somewhere. Like I'm not like discrediting that, and I know it's important and all that, but I'm just talking about like indirectly communicating who you are as a company can just come by like giving away information. Yeah.
I think that, and that's actually the funny thing about all this, is that I think that the first thing you should do is just exactly what we did, like we said. If I'm a head of talent acquisition out there, set up a Google survey, ask what questions you would ask to any candidate out there. Like, what do you want to know about our company? What would get you excited to work here? What concerns would you have about working here? You know, what can you not tell about us from our site that you'd like to know? Make it public. You're going to find out more than you expected, more than you could possibly want to know about where you're both on the mark, where you're missing the mark. And you're going to have candidates actually telling you what it's going to take for them to get over the top and want to join your company.
And even framing it to like, hey, candidate, I want to make this process better for everybody. Yeah. And so like, so I want your help. Like, this isn't just to like serve us as a company. Like, this is to help make the industry better. I imagine like being able to take that as a company and like repurpose it and say like, we knew our recruiting process was broken. Here's what we did to fix it. And then you just talk through that process and you put that out there, and suddenly like you as a company have become a thought leader in like fixing the shit that's broken. Like,
and the best thing about that is no one else is doing it.
Nobody's doing it at all.
First person to listen, to watch the show and actually execute on, you're the industry leader, and we gave you the idea. It'll work. 100%.
It will work. All right.
Did you have anything else?
Did we?
Other points?
Did we say remote versus in office?
Oh no, we totally missed that. Yeah, no, we didn't even get to that one. Okay, yeah, that was a big one too. That would have been a pretty big miss had we not mentioned it.
Okay.
Okay. So here's the thing. This is one that it didn't come up as much in the survey as I would have thought it would, but it comes up in like every conversation our recruiters have with candidates. Which I found it interesting. It came up in the conversation, the one-on-one conversations I had with people. I just think the way we structured the questions, it just wasn't like an apparent one to ask. And you said it came up with people you talked to as well too.
It did, definitely. So
yeah,
it's a really important one. And even more important than is this, like, it wasn't like if you aren't remote, I don't want to work for you. It's more like if you don't have an answer to my question.
Yeah.
That's really what it is.
Well, this is something we talked about a ton at Hirewell and some of the like other content stuff we did, is that everyone was willing to give companies leeway through 2020, even early this year, because really no one knew anything. No one knew when this was going to end. No one knew when like policies were start getting relaxed. Everyone kind of understood that companies are figuring out their real estate situation. So, but we are seeing it like I can say from like our business standpoint, it's the main reason why candidates aren't interested in jobs across any skill set, because they have other things that are remote if they're interested in that. It's also, frankly, one of the main reasons why we will or won't take on some business right now. Because we know exactly how much harder it is when things have to be in a certain location for a certain amount of time versus when they don't. So like, I feel like we're lucky we're in a major market where they're like downtown Chicago. Even if you were 100% on site, you would probably have it's not a killer, but most of the country is not in a central location with tons of people who live there, right? There's lots of areas of the country where things are a little bit further away, which is harder to find talent. And that's when it becomes kind of a deal killer if you're not like if you're not in a major market, kind of centrally located. But also it's kind of the understanding factor, which I think is even bigger. I think that everyone proved that you can be incredibly productive during the pandemic. And if you're a kind of organization that, one, if you're not willing to give that kind of at least some flexibility, people are turned off by it. But to your point, if you don't have an answer, if you still don't have a plan, it's May. Like, how do you not have a plan for this by now? Because people just aren't trusting that.
Yeah. And recruiters are being put in really awkward positions where they can't give a clear answer. Like one that I talked to said, like, we're still trying to figure out our work from home policy, and we haven't yet. And so candidates are just like, okay, well, let me know when you do. Yeah. Not a good position to be in.
Guess what? Every other company, the other 4 companies I'm talking to right now, they have it figured out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
right. Yeah. What one other, okay. I know we're going way over, but what one other point was,
I thought we'd be longer at this point, but go ahead.
Somebody else, another in-house recruiter said to me, like, I'm hoping that we can get closer to being transparent with our compensation in the future, kind of thing. And I'm like, what's stopping you from doing it? I don't know. I didn't get an answer, but like, I just, why is that such a hard thing?
I mean, I had a conversation this week with an organization that it was they've always been a little below market with their salaries, right? And they're really just because how they're run, like not everyone can be in the top 75%, there's always companies that are just cheaper than others, or, they have, there's a million different business reasons why, and it makes hiring like difficult. And they're really proud that they're able to get at least their engineering positions up to like the standard, but not everything else still. So, and what do you say to that? Like it's really hard to make content. It's really hard to kind of promote on the front end. By the way, our salaries are below market. Like, I think that's what prevents the transparency, is the fact your salaries suck. Like I'm not a fan of not being able to pay people at least the average or better. But you have to realize the reason why it's average is because like 50% of companies are below that. You know what I mean? So, and it's hard to make that one of your upfront selling points. You know what I mean? If you don't have the opportunity to first like talk about your other benefits and pluses. So
I'm wondering, and I don't. I'm not saying that.
We have a good comment here. Someone just mentioned, Daniela just mentioned, it can also show internal inequities. Maybe a position of one division pays X, but the same position other pays Y.
That's a good point.
So this gets in. Okay, we're really getting off topic here, but it's organizations that have standard. Who was it recently that said they're not going to negotiate anymore?
Coinbase.
Was it Coinbase? Yeah, Coinbase did it again. So they set out a policy that says there's going to be one salary for people at each level. If that's what the position you're interviewing for, everyone knows exactly what you're going to be making, and there's no negotiation past that, because salary negotiation also has caused DEI issues, because people of certain genders and races are have historically been more apt to push harder for salaries than others, which causes the inequity perpetuate. So, but yeah, that's another thing.
That is another thing. Yeah. I realize this isn't as easy as just like.
Yeah, it's not.
It's not.
I'm 100% a fan of salaries being transparent, but your question is, why isn't it? And those are the answers. Fixing those things is a much deeper conversation, which
it is.
I don't even know if I'm qualified for. So there, I did it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not either. So we'll just leave that to somebody else. All right, man. Yeah. Cool. I think I'm done.
Yeah. All right. So fun as hell. I love our hard stops. Like we kind of gave up the whole, like, let's kind of segue out pivot like a long time ago. We're like, all right, ran out of notes for this show.
Done.
I got a conference call in 15 minutes. Anyways, that's a wrap for the Employer Content Show. If you want to hear more of what Nate and I have to say, you can subscribe to the Hire Well channel on YouTube, where we have a playlist of all of our episodes, and the Talent Insights podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and Spotify. Nate, pleasure as always. Everyone out there, this series is going to continue. We're going to hit up probably tech and marketing as probably the next two, in whichever order we decide. So we'll kind of continue with this, try to get more things that are specific to specific areas. So
cool.
All right.
Thanks, buddy.
Everyone out there, we'll see you soon.
Bye.